My name is Hale Trenwick, and I'm about to tell you how I dismantled two people's lives with nothing but patience, intelligence, and their own stupidity. But first, let me set the scene at the company party where everything went sideways. I stood in the corner of the Charlotte Corporate Center's main ballroom, nursing my third scotch and watching my wife Lana work the room like a politician at a fundraiser. At 35, she still turned heads. Auburn hair, emerald dress that probably cost more than my car payment, and that practiced smile she'd perfected during her climb up the HR ladder at Meridian Systems. "You look thrilled to be here," my friend Rafe said, appearing beside me with two fresh drinks. At 38, Rafe Martinez was the kind of guy who could talk his way into anything and out of trouble just as easily. He worked in corporate security, which meant he knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. "Oh, absolutely ecstatic," I replied, accepting the drink. Nothing says great Friday night like watching middle management pretend they're important while the CEO holds court. Malcolm Sutter commanded the center of the room like he owned it, which technically he did. 45 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no in his entire privileged life. He ran Meridian Systems with an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather gloves. "Your wife seems to be enjoying herself," Rafe observed, and I followed his gaze to where Lana was laughing at something Malcolm had whispered in her ear. Too close, too intimate. "She's networking," I said, though the word tasted bitter. "It's what she does." What I did was design systems architecture for companies that wanted their data secure and their operations streamlined. I was good at it. Brilliant, actually. But in the corporate world, being brilliant at your job mattered less than being brilliant at playing the game. And I'd never been much of a game player. The evening dragged on with the usual corporate party rituals. Awkward small talk, forced laughter, and enough alcohol to make everyone forget how much they actually despised each other. I found myself talking shop with Cam Rodriguez, our head of security, a former police detective who'd traded his badge for better pay and fewer headaches. "You notice anything weird about the boss and your missus tonight?" Cam asked, keeping his voice low. I glanced across the room where Lana was now practically glued to Malcolm's side, her hand resting on his arm as she leaned in to whisper something that made him grin like a teenager. "Define weird," I said. "The kind of weird that makes me glad I installed those new security cameras last month." That got my attention. "What kind of cameras?" "The kind that record everything, including audio in the executive areas. Company policy, you understand? Liability protection." I filed that information away for later. One thing about being a systems architect. You learn to think 3 moves ahead, to see patterns others miss, to understand that information is the most valuable currency in any organization. Around midnight, the party began winding down. The junior staff had already made their escapes, leaving only the senior management and their spouses. I was ready to collect Lana and head home when Malcolm Sutter appeared beside me, swaying slightly from too much champagne. "Hail, my friend," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone rich men use when they are about to humiliate someone for sport. "I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bundle of black lace. Unmistakably women's underwear, Lana's underwear, unless I was very much mistaken. He pressed it into my hand along with a crisp dollar bill. "Don't wait up for your wife tonight," he said loudly enough for several nearby couples to hear. "She'll be occupied." The ballroom seemed to freeze around us. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the catering staff seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. I looked down at the lace in my hand, then at Malcolm's smug face, then across the room to where Lana stood frozen, her cheeks flushed with what might have been embarrassment or excitement. Hard to tell with her. "Well," I said, my voice perfectly calm despite the rage building in my chest, "this is certainly educational." I pocketed both items, finished my drink in one swallow, and walked out of that ballroom with my head high and my dignity intact. Behind me, I could hear the whispers starting, the shocked murmurs, the delicious scandal that would fuel office gossip for months. But they had no idea what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't the end of Hale Trenwick's humiliation. It was the beginning of Malcolm Sutter and Lana Trenwick's complete destruction. They'd just handed me the ammunition I needed to dismantle their lives piece by piece. I drove home through empty Charlotte streets, my mind already working through possibilities, angles, strategies. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had the skeleton of a plan forming. It would require patience, precision, and perfect timing. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Lucky for me, those were my specialties. I parked in the garage and sat in the darkness for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Then I pulled out my phone and made the first call. Tessa, it's Hale. I know it's late, but I need you to meet me at the house first thing tomorrow morning. Bring everything we discussed about asset protection. Yes, I'm sure. It's time. Tessa Grimm was the best divorce attorney in Charlotte, a woman who'd earned her reputation by being absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her clients' interests. I'd consulted with her 6 months ago, just as a precaution. Call it intuition, or maybe I'd just been reading the signs better than I'd admitted to myself. The house felt different when I walked inside, bigger, emptier, like a stage set waiting for the next act to begin. I went to my study and opened the safe, pulling out a folder I'd hoped I'd never need to use. Inside were financial documents, account numbers, and the legal paperwork that would transform our joint assets into something else entirely. I spent the next 3 hours making phone calls to contacts in different time zones, setting wheels in motion that couldn't be stopped once they started turning. By dawn, I'd restructured our entire financial portfolio, moved assets into protected accounts, and initiated the legal procedures that would make Lana's life very complicated very quickly. At 6 a.m. sharp, Tessa arrived with her briefcase and her game face. She was a small woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of smile that made opposing counsel reconsider their career choices. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "I feel worse. Coffee?" "Always. Now tell me what happened." I gave her the abbreviated version while she reviewed the documents I'd prepared. Her expression never changed, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was calculating damages. "Public humiliation, adultery, and if I'm reading these financial records correctly, she's been moving money around without your knowledge," she said. "How do you want to play this?" "I want to destroy them both, legally and professionally, in the most public way possible." "That can be arranged. The question is how far you're willing to go." "As far as it takes." She nodded and pulled out her own phone. "Then let's begin." The front door opened just as Tessa was explaining the finer points of North Carolina's adultery laws. Lana walked in looking like she'd spent the night somewhere other than home, her dress wrinkled and her makeup smeared. She stopped short when she saw Tessa sitting at our kitchen table with legal documents spread out like tarot cards. "What's going on here?" she demanded. I stood up slowly, savoring the moment. "Good morning, darling. I trust you had an educational evening?" Her face went pale as Tessa slid a thick envelope across the table. "Lana Trenwick," Tessa said in her courtroom voice. "You've been served." The look on Lana's face when she opened that envelope was worth every penny I'd paid Tessa over the past 6 months. Shock, fear, and calculation flickered across her features like a slideshow of human emotion. "You can't be serious," she said, scanning the divorce papers. "Hale, we can work this out. Whatever you think happened last night—" "I don't think anything happened," I interrupted. "I know exactly what happened. Your underwear and a dollar bill, remember? Malcolm was quite generous with the details." She sank into a chair, the papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. "He was just being stupid. He'd had too much to drink, and you'd had too little clothing, apparently." Tessa cleared her throat diplomatically. "Mrs. Trenwick, I'd advise you to contact your own attorney before discussing this matter further. The papers outline the terms of asset division, spousal support, and the evidence we've compiled regarding your extramarital activities." "Evidence?" Lana's voice cracked slightly. I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen was a series of text messages, time-stamped and screenshot for posterity. Her messages to Malcolm, planning their little rendezvous, discussing how to handle the Hale situation, and some particularly creative descriptions of what they'd like to do together. "Your phone backs up to our shared cloud account," I explained. "Has for years. Amazing what people forget about digital footprints." She stared at the screen, her face cycling through several shades of pale. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting myself. There's a difference." Tessa stood and gathered her papers. "Mr. Trenwick has also filed a complaint with your company's HR department regarding the hostile work environment created by your supervisor's inappropriate behavior. Harassment in the workplace is a serious matter, as I'm sure you know, given your position." That hit home. Lana's job wasn't just her career. It was her identity, her source of power and influence. The thought of losing it clearly terrified her more than losing our marriage. "You bastard," she whispered. Now, I said. "Let's keep this civil. After all, we still have to work in the same building." Actually, that wasn't going to be true much longer, but she didn't need to know that yet. After Tessa left, Lana tried a different approach. She changed into something more comfortable, a silk robe that had once been my weakness, and attempted to seduce her way out of trouble. "Come on, Hale," she purred, moving closer. "We've been together for 8 years. Doesn't that mean something? Can't we just forget last night ever happened? I looked at her with the same expression I might use to examine a particularly interesting bug. You're right. 8 years should mean something. It should mean loyalty, respect, basic human decency. Instead, it means I wasted 8 years of my life on someone who'd rather humiliate me in public than have an honest conversation about our problems. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't. Hale, please. The time for please was before you decided to make me the laughingstock of our entire company. Now it's time for consequences. I left her standing in our living room and drove to work, where the real fun was about to begin. Meridian Systems occupied 15 floors of a glass tower in downtown Charlotte, and by the time I arrived, the gossip network was already in full swing. I could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. Perfect. My first stop was Cam's office in the security department. He looked up from his monitors with a knowing expression. Rough night? He asked. Educational. About those security cameras you mentioned. Funny thing about that. I was reviewing last night's footage this morning, just routine maintenance, you understand. Found some interesting conversations in the executive break room around 11:30. He turned his monitor toward me. On screen, Malcolm and Lana were locked in what could generously be called an embrace, but which looked more like they were trying to consume each other. The audio was crystal clear. Did you see his face when I gave him your gift? Malcolm was saying. Poor little Hale, Lana replied. He looked like a kicked puppy. Think he'll cause problems? What can he do? He's nobody. A systems nerd with no connections and no spine. By Monday, this will all be forgotten. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I watched my wife mock me with her lover. But cold was good. Cold meant clarity. I'll need copies of this, I said. Already burned to disk. Company policy requires we preserve evidence of workplace harassment. You're a good man, Cam. Just doing my job. Though I have to say, watching you work is going to be interesting. My next stop was HR, where I had an appointment with Director Patricia Callahan. She was a woman in her 50s who'd built her career on avoiding liability and protecting the company's interests. She'd also never particularly liked Malcolm's management style, which made this conversation much easier. Mr. Trenwick, she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk, I understand you have concerns about workplace harassment. I have evidence of workplace harassment, I corrected, sliding the disk across her desk, including audio and video documentation of my supervisor engaging in inappropriate behavior with my wife, a fellow employee. She loaded the disk and watched in silence, her expression growing progressively more severe. When it finished, she sat back in her chair and steepled her fingers. This is problematic. That's one word for it. What outcome are you seeking, Mr. Trenwick? I want Malcolm Sutter removed from any position of authority over me, and I want a formal investigation into his conduct. I also want it on record that any retaliation against me will be considered part of the ongoing harassment. She nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with the board, but I can tell you that this kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Mr. Sutter will be suspended pending investigation, effective immediately. And my wife? Mrs. Trenwick will also be suspended. We can't have her involved in the investigation given her obvious conflict of interest. I left HR feeling lighter than I had in months. Phase 1 was complete. Both of them were now professionally compromised, their reputations in tatters, and their ability to retaliate severely limited. But I was just getting started. My phone buzzed with a text from Lana. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. I replied. You're right. It hasn't gone nearly far enough. The next message came from Malcolm. You little worm. You think you can threaten me? I'll destroy you. I forwarded his message to Tessa with a note. Add this to the harassment file. By lunch, word had spread through the building that both Malcolm and Lana were suspended. The whispers were getting louder, the stares more obvious. I ate my sandwich in the break room, listening to the speculation swirl around me like a tornado of gossip. I heard they were caught on camera, someone said. In the executive break room, apparently. Poor Hale. How humiliating. I finished my sandwich and stood up. The room fell silent. Actually, I said conversationally, I'm having the best day I've had in years. Thanks for asking. The silence followed me out of the break room and down the hallway. Let them talk. Let them speculate. The truth was so much better than anything they could imagine. That afternoon, I received a call from my bank confirming that all joint accounts had been frozen pending the divorce proceedings. I'd moved my assets into a new account at a different bank, but Lana's access to our shared funds was now completely cut off. She called me 17 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my desk and headed home, where I found Lana waiting in the driveway. She'd been crying, her makeup streaked and her hair disheveled. "Hale, please," she said as I got out of my car. "You've made your point. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can't we just..." "Just what? Pretend it never happened? Go back to the way things were?" I shook my head. "You made your choice, Lana. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But the money, the accounts? I can't even buy groceries." "Should have thought of that before you decided to humiliate me in front of half of Charlotte's business community. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Malcolm, he just..." "Malcolm what? Forced you to cheat? Held a gun to your head and made you mock your husband?" "No, Lana. You made your choices. All of them." I walked past her toward the house, but she grabbed my arm. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Money? I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce. Just stop this insanity." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. "I want you to understand what it feels like to have your life destroyed by someone who's supposed to love you. I want you to know what it's like to be humiliated, to have people whisper about you, to lose everything you thought was secure. And then? Then nothing. That's it. That's the whole plan." She let go of my arm, stepping back like I'd slapped her. "You're not the man I married." "No," I agreed. "I'm not. The man you married was weak, trusting, and naive. He's gone now. You might want to get used to dealing with who's left." I went inside and locked the door behind me, leaving her standing in the driveway. Through the window, I watched her get in her car and drive away, probably heading to Malcolm's place to plan their next move. Let them plan. I was 3 steps ahead of anything they could come up with, and I was just getting warmed up. The real fun was about to begin. Monday morning brought the kind of crisp October weather that made Charlotte look like a postcard. It also brought an emergency board meeting at Meridian Systems, which I knew about, because Cam had mentioned it during our morning coffee. "They're meeting at 8, he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Thought you might want to know what they're discussing." Inside the envelope were printed emails between Malcolm and 3 board members, all expressing concern about the situation and the potential liability it created for the company. Apparently, Malcolm had been busy over the weekend, trying to spin the narrative in his favor. "How did you get these?" I asked. "Company email system. Everything's backed up on our servers, and as head of security, I have access to anything that might represent a threat to the organization." He grinned. Adultery and harassment definitely qualify as threats. I spent the morning working on a routine system upgrade, but my mind was elsewhere. Around 10:30, Patricia Callahan called my extension. "Mr. Trenwick, could you come to the conference room on 15? The board would like to speak with you." The conference room was a testament to corporate excess. Mahogany table, leather chairs, and a view of the Charlotte skyline that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. 5 board members sat around the table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Please sit down," said Chairman Robert Hayes, a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd built his fortune in real estate development. "We've been reviewing the situation regarding Mr. Sutter and your personal circumstances." "My personal circumstances became a workplace issue when my supervisor decided to make them public," I replied evenly. "Yes. Well, that's what we wanted to discuss. The company has a reputation to maintain, and this kind of scandal is entirely of Mr. Sutter's making," I interrupted. "I filed a legitimate harassment complaint backed by audio and video evidence. If the company has a reputation problem, it's because your CEO created it." Board member Janet Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, leaned forward. "What would you consider an appropriate resolution, Mr. Trenwick?" "Malcolm Sutter's termination, a formal apology, and assurance that there will be no retaliation against me for reporting his misconduct." The board members exchanged glances. Hayes cleared his throat. "That seems reasonable. However, we'd also like to offer you a transfer to our Denver office. Fresh start, promotion, significant salary increase." I almost laughed. They wanted to solve their problem by making me disappear. "Thank you, but no. I like Charlotte. I have roots here. Besides, why should I be the one to leave?" Another round of uncomfortable glances. Morrison spoke again. "Mr. Sutter has been with the company for 12 years. He's built significant client relationships, and he's also created a hostile work environment and exposed the company to massive liability. But that's your decision to make. I've filed my complaint, provided my evidence, and stated my position. The rest is up to you." I left them to their deliberations and went back to work. An hour later, the announcement came via company-wide email. Malcolm Sutter had been terminated, effective immediately. The email cited violations of company policy regarding workplace conduct and assured everyone that Meridian Systems maintained the highest standards of professional behavior. My phone started buzzing immediately. Text messages, voicemails, emails. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, what I'd done, how I'd managed to bring down the untouchable Malcolm Sutter. I ignored them all and went to lunch. That's where I found Malcolm waiting for me in the parking garage, leaning against his silver Tesla like he owned the world. He didn't look quite as polished as usual. His tie was crooked, his hair mussed, and there was something wild in his eyes. "You smug little worm," he snarled as I approached my car. "You think you've won something? You've destroyed my career, my reputation?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "You did that all by yourself when you decided to humiliate me in public. I just made sure there were consequences. This isn't over." "Actually, it is. You're finished, Malcolm. No one in this industry will touch you after this. Your wife's probably already called her attorney, and your country club buddies are going to start avoiding your calls. You're done." His face flushed red with rage. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Neither do you, apparently. Otherwise, you wouldn't have started a war with someone who builds security systems for a living." I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing there with his impotent fury. But I wasn't done with Malcolm Sutter, not even close. That evening, I met Rafe at a sports bar downtown. He was grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You magnificent bastard," he said, raising his beer in a toast. "The whole building's talking about what you did. Malcolm Sutter, the golden boy, brought down by a systems nerd with a grudge." "It's not a grudge," I corrected. "It's justice. Whatever you want to call it, it's beautiful. So what's next?" "Next, I make sure everyone in Charlotte knows exactly what kind of people they're dealing with." I pulled out my phone and showed him the video I'd uploaded to YouTube that afternoon. It was security footage from the party, edited to show the most damaging moments. Malcolm and Lana's intimate conversations, their mocking of me, and the moment he handed me her underwear. The audio was crystal clear, and I'd added subtitles to make sure nothing was missed. Jesus, Hale, this is nuclear. This is just the beginning. The video had already gotten 3,000 views and climbing. By morning, it would be all over social media, shared and reshared until everyone in our professional circle had seen it. Malcolm and Lana's humiliation would be complete and permanent. My phone buzzed with a call from Lana. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her frantic message. "Hale, you have to take that video down. Please. People are calling me, texting me. My mother saw it. My mother. How could you do this to me? We were married. Doesn't that mean anything?" I deleted the message and ordered another beer. "You really think this is the right play?" Rafe asked. "I mean, she was your wife." "She was my wife when she decided to cheat on me. She was my wife when she mocked me in front of our colleagues. She was my wife when she helped Malcolm humiliate me in the most public way possible. Being my wife didn't stop her from destroying our marriage, so why should it stop me from making sure everyone knows who she really is?" The video hit 10,000 views by midnight. Local news picked it up the next day, running a story about corporate misconduct and workplace harassment. The comments section was brutal. Hundreds of people sharing their own stories of cheating spouses and abusive bosses, all praising me for fighting back. Malcolm's Tesla was vandalized that night. Someone had keyed "cheater" into the paint, slashed his tires, and filled the interior with glitter and what smelled like fish sauce. The whole thing was caught on the parking garage's security cameras, but the perpetrator had worn a hood and kept their face hidden. I had nothing to do with it, of course, but I may have mentioned to a few people where Malcolm usually parked his car. The video went viral, shared across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by people who'd never heard of Meridian Systems but loved a good revenge story. Malcolm and Lana became minor internet celebrities, the kind people pointed at and laughed. Lana tried to fight back, posting her own version of events on social media, claiming I was abusive and controlling. That she'd been trying to leave me for months. That the whole thing was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Nobody believed her. The evidence was too clear, the timeline too obvious. She'd been caught red-handed, and her attempts to rewrite history only made her look more desperate and dishonest. Malcolm hired a crisis management firm to try to salvage his reputation, but it was too late. The story had taken on a life of its own, spreading beyond Charlotte, beyond North Carolina, becoming a cautionary tale about corporate arrogance and the dangers of underestimating the quiet guy in the corner. I became something of a folk hero, the everyman who'd stood up to the bully and won. Interview requests poured in from local media, podcast hosts, even a producer from a cable network who wanted to turn my story into a documentary. I turned them all down. I wasn't interested in fame or publicity. I just wanted Malcolm and Lana to understand what it felt like to have their lives destroyed by someone they'd underestimated. Mission accomplished, but I still wasn't done. The public humiliation was just the appetizer. The main course was still coming. 3 weeks after Malcolm's termination, I was settling into my new role as interim head of systems architecture when Tessa called with interesting news. Your wife hired Bradley Felton, she said, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Should I know that name? He's the most expensive divorce attorney in Charlotte. Charges $500 an hour and has a reputation for playing dirty. The interesting part is how she's paying him. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the view from my new corner office. Malcolm's former office, actually. The board had offered it to me along with a substantial raise and the promise that I'd be considered for the permanent position. I'm listening. She took out a loan against her car and liquidated her retirement account. She's also been trying to access your joint business assets, claiming she has a legal right to them as your spouse. That was the move I'd been waiting for. And she's about to discover that those assets don't exist anymore, at least not in any form she can touch. 6 months before the party, I'd quietly restructured my consulting business, transferring all assets to a holding company with myself as the sole proprietor. Lana's name had never been on any of the paperwork, despite her belief that marriage gave her automatic rights to everything I'd built. How long before she figures it out? Felton's probably explaining it to her right now. I could picture the scene. Lana sitting in some overpriced law office, confident that she was about to take me for half of everything, only to discover that there was nothing for her to take. The consulting contracts, the client relationships, the intellectual property, all of it legally mine and completely beyond her reach. My phone rang an hour later. Lana's number. You bastard, she screamed the moment I answered. You planned this. You've been planning this for months. Planning what? Protecting my business interests? Yes, I've been doing that since the day I started the company. It's called being responsible. Those are marital assets. I have rights. You have the right to whatever the court decides you're entitled to from our actual marital assets. My business isn't one of them. We'll see about that. Bradley says whatever you're paying him to say. But the law is the law, and the paperwork is the paperwork. You want to fight it? Go ahead. It'll cost you more in legal fees than you could ever hope to win. She hung up on me, but I knew this was far from over. Desperate people do desperate things, and Lana was definitely desperate. That became clear the next evening when I found her in my house, going through my desk drawers like a common burglar. Find anything interesting? I asked from the doorway. She spun around, guilty and defiant at the same time. This is still my house, too. Actually, it's not. The divorce papers you were served included a restraining order. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of me. I need my things. Your things were packed and delivered to your apartment last week. What you need is the combination to my safe, which you're not going to get. She straightened up, trying to regain some dignity. I know you're hiding assets. I know you moved money around to keep it from me. I protected my business from exactly this kind of fishing expedition. If you'd been a faithful wife, it wouldn't have been necessary. Faithful? She laughed bitterly. You want to talk about faithful? You were married to your computer, not to me. When was the last time we went on a real date? When was the last time you looked at me like I was a woman instead of a roommate? When was the last time you gave me a reason to? That hit home. Her face crumpled for a moment before the anger returned. I made a mistake, Hale. One mistake. Does that really justify destroying my entire life? One mistake? You've been having an affair for months. The texts on your phone go back to last spring. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and mocking me behind my back for half a year. The party wasn't your mistake. It was just the first time you got caught. She stared at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine remorse. Then it was gone, replaced by calculation. What do you want? She asked. Money? I'll sign over my rights to everything. The house, the cars, whatever. Just make this stop. I don't want your money, Lana. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to learn that you can't treat people like garbage and expect them to just take it. And Malcolm. Malcolm's learning the same lesson. She moved toward me, and I saw her shift into seduction mode, the practiced smile, the subtle body language, the voice that dropped half an octave. We could still fix this, she said softly. We were good together once. We could be good together again. We were never good together. We were convenient together. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and called Cam. I need you to come to my house. I have a trespasser who needs to be escorted off the property. Lana's face went white. You wouldn't? I just did. Cam arrived 10 minutes later with a patrol car. He still had friends in the police department. Lana was arrested for violating the restraining order and spent the night in jail. The mugshot made the local news, adding another layer of humiliation to her growing collection. But if I thought that would be the end of it, I was wrong. 2 days later, I walked out of the office to find Malcolm waiting by my car. He looked terrible, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, the smell of alcohol heavy on his breath. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't." I tried to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm. Big mistake. I'd been taking martial arts classes for 3 years, partly for fitness and partly because I'd always been the small guy who got pushed around. I wasn't small anymore, and I definitely wasn't going to be pushed around. I grabbed his wrist, twisted it in a way that made him yelp, and spun him around so he was facing away from me with his arm pinned behind his back. "Let go of me, you little—" I applied pressure, and he shut up quickly. "Here's how this is going to work," I said quietly. "You're going to get in your car and drive away. You're not going to contact me, threaten me, or come anywhere near me again. If you do, I'll have you arrested for harassment, and then I'll sue you for everything you have left. Are we clear?" "You can't do this to me," he gasped. "I built that company. I made it what it is." "You destroyed that company the moment you decided to make your personal life everyone else's business. The board fired you because you were a liability, not because of anything I did." I released him and stepped back. He turned around, rubbing his wrist and glaring at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet." He got in his car and drove away, but I knew he'd be back. Men like Malcolm don't accept defeat gracefully. They keep fighting until someone makes them stop. I was prepared to be that someone. The next phase of my plan required more finesse than force. I'd spent weeks building relationships with Malcolm's former clients, offering them better service at lower prices. 3 of his biggest accounts had already signed with my consulting firm, and 2 more were considering it. Malcolm's crisis management team was fighting a losing battle. Every time they managed to get the story out of the headlines, something new would surface. Another video, another email, another witness to his pattern of inappropriate behavior. I may have helped some of those stories surface. Information has a way of finding its way to the right journalists when it's in the public interest. Lana was having her own problems. Her suspension from Meridian had become a termination, officially for violating company policy regarding workplace relationships, but everyone knew the real reason. She'd become toxic, a liability no HR department would want to deal with. She'd applied for positions at a dozen other companies, but the viral video had made her unemployable in Charlotte's tight-knit business community. Everyone knew who she was, and no one wanted that kind of drama in their organization. Her apartment was in a complex on the south side of town, a significant step down from our house in Myers Park. I drove by one evening and saw her car in the parking lot, a 10-year-old Honda that had seen better days. Her Tesla had been repossessed the week before. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. She'd made her choices. Now she was living with them. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafe. "Turn on Channel 9. You're going to love this." The story was about Malcolm's country club membership being revoked due to conduct unbecoming a member. Apparently, the viral video had been too much for the club's board of directors, who prided themselves on maintaining a certain standard of behavior among their membership. The reporter interviewed several club members, all of whom expressed shock and disappointment at Malcolm's actions. One particularly memorable quote came from the club president. "We simply cannot tolerate this kind of behavior from our members. It reflects poorly on the entire organization." I turned off the TV and poured myself a glass of wine. It had been a good day, but the best was yet to come. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, hand-delivered to both Lana and Malcolm's current addresses. It was simple and elegant. "Mr. Hale Trenwick requests the pleasure of your company for a discussion of mutual interests. Saturday, November 15th, 7 p.m. at his residence. Light refreshments will be served. RSVP not required." I knew they'd come. Curiosity, desperation, and arrogance would compel them to show up, each thinking they could somehow turn the situation to their advantage. They had no idea what they were walking into. I spent the week preparing, turning my house into a stage for the final act of this drama. Hidden cameras in every room, audio recording equipment disguised as decorative objects, and a live streaming setup that would broadcast everything to a private YouTube channel I'd created specifically for this purpose. The guest list was carefully curated. Lana, Malcolm, Tessa, Rafe, Cam, and a few select colleagues from Meridian who'd been personally affected by Malcolm's management style. I also invited Patricia Callahan from HR and 2 board members who'd been instrumental in Malcolm's termination. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that made everything feel sharp and clear. I'd hired a catering service to provide drinks and appetizers, nothing fancy, but enough to create the illusion of a civilized gathering. Lana arrived first, driving her Honda and wearing a dress I recognized from our early dating days. She was trying to look confident, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes as she approached the front door. "Hello, Lana," I said, opening the door before she could knock. "Thank you for coming." "What is this about, Hale? Your invitation was rather cryptic." "All will be revealed. Come in, have a drink. The others will be here shortly." Malcolm arrived 10 minutes later in an Uber, his Tesla still in the shop after the vandalism incident. He looked around suspiciously as I led him into the living room where Lana was nursing a glass of wine. "What the hell is she doing here?" he demanded. "She's here for the same reason you are. We have unfinished business to discuss." The other guests arrived in quick succession, Tessa with her briefcase and knowing smile, Rafe with a bottle of expensive whiskey, Cam looking like he was expecting trouble, and the Meridian representatives looking uncomfortable but curious. Once everyone was settled with drinks, I moved to the center of the room and activated the streaming system with a discreet remote control. A small red light on the camera hidden in the bookshelf confirmed we were live. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know some of you are wondering why you're here, so let me explain. 3 months ago, my wife and my boss decided to humiliate me in the most public way possible. Tonight, I'm returning the favor." Lana started to stand. "I'm not staying for this." "Actually, you are," Tessa said, pulling out a legal document. "Mr. Trenwick has some things to say that directly affect your divorce proceedings. If you leave now, you'll be considered in contempt of court." It was a bluff, but Lana didn't know that. She sat back down, her face pale. Malcolm was less easily intimidated. "You can't force us to listen to your pathetic whining, Hale. We're leaving." "By all means, leave," I said. "But you might want to hear what I have to say about your little business venture first." That stopped him cold. "What business venture?" I pulled out a manila folder and spread its contents on the coffee table. Financial records, email printouts, legal documents, and photographs. "The business venture you and Lana have been planning for the past 6 months. The one where you use her position as my wife to gain access to my client list and consulting contracts, then start your own firm with stolen intellectual property." The room went silent. Lana's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. We weren't," she stammered. "You weren't what?" "Planning to steal my business? I have emails, Lana. I have bank records showing you've been funneling money into an offshore account. I have incorporation papers for Sutter Trenwick Consulting, filed 3 weeks before the party." Malcolm's face had gone from red to white to green. How did I find out? I'm a systems architect, Malcolm. I specialize in information security. Did you really think you could plan something like this without leaving digital footprints?" I turned to address the camera directly. "For those just joining us, we're discussing how my estranged wife and former boss attempted to steal my business while conducting an affair behind my back. The evidence is quite compelling." Rafe was grinning like a shark. The Meridian representatives were taking notes. Cam was recording everything on his phone as backup. "The affair was just a cover," I continued. "A way to keep me distracted while you set up your competing business. The plan was to humiliate me into quitting Meridian, then use Lana's access to my files to steal my client relationships and proprietary systems." "You can't prove that," Malcolm said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can." I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward the group. On screen was a series of email exchanges between Malcolm and Lana, discussing client lists, contract terms, and strategies for approaching my existing customers. "This one's my favorite," I said, clicking on a particular message. Lana to Malcolm. "Hale is so trusting, he'll never see this coming. By the time he realizes what's happening, we'll have all his clients and he'll be finished in Charlotte." Lana was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You weren't supposed to find out." "But I did find out, and now everyone else is finding out too." I gestured toward the camera. "We're currently live streaming to about 3,000 viewers, with more joining every minute. The local news has been alerted, and I've sent copies of all this evidence to the State Attorney General's office." Malcolm lunged toward me, but Cam intercepted him easily, pinning his arms behind his back. "Assault," Tessa noted helpfully. "In front of witnesses and on camera. That'll look good in court." "You're insane," Malcolm gasped. "You can't do this to us." "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied calmly. "I'm simply revealing what you've already done to yourselves. The fraud, the theft, the conspiracy, that's all your handiwork. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." Patricia Callahan spoke up for the first time. "Mr. Trenwick, are you saying that Mrs. Trenwick used her position at Meridian to facilitate this scheme?" "I'm saying she used her access to our HR systems to pull employee files, salary information, and client contact lists, all of which she passed along to Malcolm for use in their competing business." "That's corporate espionage," one of the board members said. We could face massive liability issues. Could and will, Tessa corrected. I've already filed preliminary injunctions to prevent the use of any stolen Meridian property, and I'm preparing criminal charges for industrial espionage. The live stream viewer count had climbed to over 5,000. The chat was exploding with comments, most of them supportive of my actions and highly critical of Lana and Malcolm. Please, Lana whispered, please stop this. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll disappear, leave Charlotte, never contact you again. What I want, I said, looking directly at her, is for you to understand what it feels like to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted. What I want is for Malcolm to know what it's like to lose everything because of his own arrogance and stupidity. And what I want, I continued, turning back to the camera, is for everyone watching to understand that there are consequences for treating people badly, that sometimes the quiet guy in the corner is keeping score, and eventually the bill comes due. Malcolm had stopped struggling against Cam's grip. He looked defeated, broken, like a man who'd finally realized that his actions had consequences he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. The business you tried to steal is worth approximately $2 million, I announced. The clients you attempted to poach represent another $3 million in potential revenue. The intellectual property you tried to copy took me 5 years to develop, and you thought you could just take it all because I was too weak to stop you. I walked over to where Malcolm was being restrained and looked him in the eye. You were wrong. The doorbell rang, and Cam released Malcolm to answer it. 2 police officers entered, followed by a man in a suit who identified himself as an investigator with the district attorney's office. Mr. Trenwick, we received your complaint about corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud. We'd like to speak with Mr. Sutter and Mrs. Trenwick. As the police read them their rights, I addressed the camera one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes tonight's presentation. The lesson, as always, is simple. Treat people with respect, honor your commitments, and remember that actions have consequences. Thank you for watching, and good night. I ended the live stream and turned off the cameras. The final viewer count was just over 8,000, and the video would be saved permanently to my channel for anyone who wanted to review the evidence. Lana and Malcolm were led away in handcuffs, their humiliation complete and public. The other guests gradually departed, leaving me alone in my house for the first time in months. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my chair, looking out at the Charlotte skyline through my window. It had been a long, difficult journey from that night at the company party to this moment, but it was finally over. They'd underestimated me, dismissed me as weak and inconsequential. They'd thought they could destroy my life without consequences, take everything I'd worked for without resistance. They were wrong, and now everyone knew it. The aftermath of the live stream was everything I'd hoped for and more. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times and picked up by 3 local news stations. The story went national when a cable news network ran a segment on corporate crime and workplace harassment, using my situation as a prime example. Malcolm and Lana were released on bail, but the damage was done. The district attorney's office had opened a formal investigation into corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud. Their mugshots were plastered across social media, accompanied by the hashtag #RevengeStreaming that had started trending after my broadcast. I was back at work on Monday morning, reviewing system security protocols, when Patricia Callahan called my office. Mr. Trenwick, could you come to the conference room? The board would like to discuss your future with the company. I found the same 5 board members who'd questioned me weeks earlier, but their attitude had completely changed. Instead of looking uncomfortable, they seemed almost eager to speak with me. Hale, Chairman Hayes said, using my first name for the first time ever. We wanted to personally thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. The potential damage to Meridian if that information had been stolen, well, it doesn't bear thinking about. I was protecting my own interests, I replied. The fact that it helped the company was just a bonus. Nevertheless, we're grateful, which is why we'd like to offer you Malcolm's position permanently. CEO of Meridian Systems, with full authority over operations and a compensation package that reflects the value you've brought to this organization. I leaned back in my chair, considering the offer. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at the chance. Now it felt like a consolation prize. That's very generous, I said finally, but I'm going to decline. The surprise on their faces was worth the entire conversation. You're declining? Janet Morrison asked. May I ask why? Because I don't want to run someone else's company. I want to run my own. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd spent the last 8 years building my reputation and my skills. I'm giving my notice, effective in 2 weeks. I'm starting my own firm, focusing on cybersecurity consulting for mid-sized companies. I already have 3 clients lined up, with more interested. But Hale, Hayes protested, we're offering you everything you've worked for. The position, the salary, the respect. The respect was always mine, I interrupted. I just had to remind people of that fact. I left them to discuss succession planning and returned to my office where I found Rafe waiting with coffee and a knowing grin. So you turned them down, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you? Patricia called Cam. Cam called me. The whole building's buzzing about it. You just turned down the top job at a major corporation to start your own business. People are calling you either brilliant or insane. Maybe both. Probably both. So what's the real reason? I sat down and looked around Malcolm's former office, my temporary office. It was impressive, intimidating, designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Everything I'd thought I wanted when I was the quiet guy in the corner, overlooked and underestimated. The real reason is that I don't want to become Malcolm, I said. I don't want to sit in this office, making other people feel the way he made me feel. I want to build something that's mine, something I can be proud of. And the revenge thing? That's finished? I thought about Lana and Malcolm, probably meeting with their attorneys right now, trying to figure out how to minimize the criminal charges and salvage what was left of their reputations. They'd lost everything, their jobs, their relationship, their standing in the community, and soon, probably their freedom. It's finished, I said. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure everyone was watching when it happened. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. This is Stephanie Sutter, Malcolm's ex-wife. I saw your stream. Well done. He had it coming. I showed the message to Rafe, who laughed out loud. Even his ex-wife is on your side. That's got to hurt. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. I cleaned out my office, transferred my projects to other team members, and said goodbye to colleagues who'd watched my transformation from overlooked systems architect to corporate legend. Some were envious, others were inspired, but all of them understood that they'd witnessed something extraordinary. On my last day, I was packing the final box when Cam appeared in my doorway. "Got a minute?" he asked. "For you? Always." He closed the door behind him and sat down across from my desk. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Malcolm's been making noise about getting back at you. Nothing specific, but he's been asking around about your new business, your clients, your home address. Is that a threat?" "It's information. What you do with it is up to you." I nodded, filing the warning away for future reference. "Thanks, Cam. I appreciate the heads up. Just returning the favor. You gave me the best entertainment I've had in 20 years of security work." That evening, I drove home through Charlotte's downtown district, past the restaurants and bars where Malcolm used to hold court, past the office buildings where Lana used to network and scheme. The city looked different now, smaller somehow, like I was seeing it from a greater height. My house felt different too, not empty, but peaceful. The constant tension that had filled it during the final months of my marriage was gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. I was pouring myself a celebratory drink when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery driver with a large envelope. "Mr. Trenwick, certified delivery." The envelope was from the district attorney's office. Inside was a letter informing me that both Malcolm and Lana had accepted plea bargains rather than face trial. Malcolm would serve 18 months in minimum security prison and pay substantial fines. Lana would serve 6 months and perform community service. More importantly, they'd both agreed to permanent restraining orders that prevented them from contacting me or interfering with my business. The nightmare was officially over. I walked out onto my back patio and looked up at the stars, barely visible through Charlotte's light pollution. Somewhere out there, Malcolm was probably drinking himself into oblivion, and Lana was probably planning her next move, her next attempt to reinvent herself. But that was their problem now, not mine. I'd learned something important over the past few months. Revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about refusing to let them destroy you. It was about standing up, fighting back, and making sure the world knew who you really were. Malcolm and Lana had thought they could humiliate me, steal from me, and discard me without consequences. They'd been wrong about all of it, but mostly they'd been wrong about me. I wasn't the quiet guy in the corner anymore. I was the guy who'd fought back and won, who'd turned his greatest defeat into his greatest victory. And that was a story worth telling. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to my new office, a modest space in a converted warehouse, nothing like the corporate tower where I'd spent the last 8 years. But it was mine, bought and paid for with money I'd earned through my own skills and determination. The sign on the door read Trenwick Security Solutions, and underneath, in smaller letters, Protecting What Matters Most. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. Behind me, Charlotte was waking up to another day, another set of challenges and opportunities. But I was no longer just surviving those challenges. I was creating them for others to overcome, and that made all the difference. The final irony arrived quietly, almost politely, about 6 months later. I remember the afternoon clearly. A slow Tuesday, the kind where the office was so calm you could hear the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional tap of my keyboard echoing through the room. I wasn't expecting anything significant, just another day of solving other people's technical messes and drinking coffee that had been sitting out for far too long. Then my email pinged with a notification, a contract proposal flagged urgent. It was from a major corporation, one known for its spotless public reputation and its insistence on perfection. According to the message, they'd recently experienced a large-scale data breach that had compromised sensitive employee information and exposed a portion of their high-value client portfolio. Their internal team had tried to contain the situation but failed, and now they were scrambling to bring in outside support. They needed discretion, expertise, and results delivered with absolute precision. It sounded like the kind of job that would normally go to a big consulting firm with a flashy Manhattan office. The company's name sat at the bottom of the email: Meridian Systems. I stared at it longer than necessary, letting the moment stretch, letting the universe have its dramatic pause. If life had a soundtrack, that would have been the part where the music shifted. Meridian, the place where everything had begun, and the place where everything had fallen apart. The company where Malcolm and Lana had woven their web of manipulation, arrogance, and thinly veiled superiority. The same company that once treated me like a forgettable background character in a story they assumed belonged only to them. Now they needed me. I accepted the contract, of course. There was never any question. This wasn't about pride or payback, not on the surface, anyway. It was about professionalism. Business was business, and they needed the best cybersecurity consultant in Charlotte, someone who could walk into a burning building of digital chaos and rebuild it from the inside out. That would be me. Somewhere along the way, the quiet guy sitting in the corner, the one everyone underestimated, had become the person companies called when they needed real solutions, not shortcuts, not theatrics, but genuine expertise. I hadn't changed my values to get there. I hadn't stepped on anyone, played dirty, or adopted the methods of the very people who once tried to push me aside. I built my reputation the way I built everything else in my life. Patiently, consistently, and with a level of integrity most people talk about but rarely practice. And yet, I couldn't pretend that moment didn't mean something. Malcolm and Lana had taught me a lesson, probably not the one they intended. Their actions had once shaken my confidence, cracked my trust, and forced me to question the point of doing things the right way when the world seemed to reward the opposite. But standing there, reading their company's desperate request for my help, I realized something simple and powerful. Sometimes the best revenge is refusing to let anyone else determine the kind of person you become. I refused to fold. I refused to break. I pushed back, rebuilt myself, and rose higher than they ever imagined I could. Not through schemes or shortcuts, but by staying exactly who I said I was. In the end, I didn't just survive, I succeeded. And without needing to raise my voice or prove anything to anyone, the message was clear. I'd refused, I'd fought back, and I'd won.